let's talk a little bit about tools and different ways to play different things. And I got a bunch of little stuff that we can experiment with here. So most of the time when we're playing in a church environment, obviously drums become an issue. One of the reasons they become an issue is because nowadays churches were not designed for drums, especially old church buildings. New buildings, they try to, but I'm a sales engineer here, so we sell stuff all the time, and it's the biggest battle to get churches to understand that acoustic treatment should be step one, but it's not. Our own church, it wasn't, and we had to do it way later. But it's so important because, again, this is a loud instrument. These drums in particular are loud, and we can talk about ways to not be so loud too. But so we have to think about it. Now, I hate drum screens, I hate drum booths, I hate the concept. And the reason I hate the concept because it's a Band-Aid, and it's not really addressing the issue. Now, I understand for some folks it's a less expensive way to deal with it, but the reality is the room's the problem, the drums are the problem, and the player's the problem. Those are usually the three elements, right? Because usually the player is playing too loud and doesn't really get it and doesn't really understand and doesn't have the technique to be able to bring things down. And again, that's just reality, and so that's something that they can work on and develop, but it's not going to change overnight. The drums and cymbals being too loud, now that we can deal with. So I wouldn't use these in context of a church where volume is an issue. These are loud. These drums ring a lot and they're loud. Kevin, who's playing at our Pine Hills Church, City Church, he has a kit that is perfect for that job, and it's ideal. They're small drums. He's got them tuned pretty dead, which is a good thing, and they don't ring a lot, not a ton of noise coming out of the actual drums. We can mic them up a little bit, make them sound right in the system. So that's thinking about, okay, what can I do drumistically with what I'm using to make it easier in the room? And that helps a ton, is just by thinking smaller. The other thing is cymbals. This cymbal, I love this cymbal because I can lay into this thing like mad and it doesn't really get that loud because it's really dark and it's that kind of a cymbal. So, if I lay into it, I'm laying into it. It's loud, but it's not crazy loud, and you don't have that sort of king, king, king kind of pitch thing getting you. It's very dark and sort of whoosh kind of a sound. I don't have the other cymbals up here, but we have another cymbal that's just a lot pingier, it's louder, it's the high frequencies cut a lot more. Thinner, darker cymbals. Thinner the pitch, thinner the cymbal, lower the pitch. Okay, so thin cymbals tend to be very low pitch, sort of washy. Okay, like this crash, that's not really offensive. When I lay into it, you don't get this kind of a thing, you get more of a so I like that kind of a sound. So those will help a lot in controlling things. Now, tools that we can use, these are not huge sticks, but if you notice when I'm playing, I have not played loud at all, and that's just loud. I'm barely hitting it. They ring, they have a lot of noise going on. So here's a bunch of things that we can do. So these are really cool. These are plastic brushes. Now, I'm not a big fan of, if I'm going to use something like this, I'm going to play exactly the same. Because I'm not going to play exactly the same because these are different. So what I like to do on something like this is just to play them on the snare drum. Okay, so obviously that's very controlled and a very, very light kind of a sound. These also sound pretty good on cymbals. You get kind of an attack out of them, which is kind of nice. You can play pretty loud with these too if you want to. So I can get some oomph, all right? Then we got the hot rods. Now these are you'll love these. These are what we call used hot rods. There's about 6 rods left. So these are great for that in between. Now they tend to be pretty loud on the snare drum. I can still play. So these are in between, really. I mean, I think that's the best way to call them. Still you can play loud, still you can play soft, still you have articulation. One of the things you always hear people complain about when they have to use these kinds of things is, well, I can't play as intense, and it's just not, I think you can. I think there still can be an intent. It's how you play that's going to give the intensity. That first tune is a big tune that I played that's intense, and I wasn't bashing. If you watch the recording on that, and this is where I think we get messed up, is you watch the recording, and he is bashing. They're bashing. They're literally bashing because they're in a big old arena and they're recording and they want it to sound, and so they're bashing on stuff, which is totally appropriate in that context. But we take a song like that, an approach like that, and we put it in a room with 150 people that has pews and has cement and has some stained glass on the side. What's going to happen? People are going to turn around and leave. You're going to offend them is what's going to happen, and not because you're playing anything bad or wrong, just because it'll be ridiculously loud. You just can't play that way. One of my students plays in the junior high band at our church, and we were working on one of those songs, and the first thing I told him, I said, you got to remember, you got to take what you're hearing here and you got to throw it out the window because you can never play that way. Because it was one of those songs, that kind of a thing where it's just smashing on the crash cymbal and it's just super aggressive. And that was with Hot Rod. And so I told him, you just cannot play that way. It just won't work. So you got to think, how can I make that feel right? How can I make that have the right oomph and sort of intensity that has, but not kill people? Because, again, that's what would happen. It would be just like, oh, it's so loud. And so you have to think that way, and we all have to think that way in context of what we're doing. So back to the drum screen thing, since we're talking about tools here. If you've ever played in one of those, of course, the reflections is a nightmare. And the other thing is, the reality is it affects the people in front, but if you don't have it completely enclosed, which is a whole other set of issues, but if you don't have it completely enclosed, then the sound is really just going up and over. And now you can have some absorption in there that will help, and it'll help with high frequency. It'll help deaden the high frequency, but it really won't. It's psychological, a lot of it, again, except for the people right around you and for open microphones around you. There it's effective because it is reducing that. When you do the room thing, I think, this is just my 2 cents, is that it creates that separation with the team. It creates a separation with the congregation. If I had my druthers, we'd be in the middle of the congregation. But we can't do that because it's not practical. And so when you're in a cage in the back of the room, separated from everybody else, it just does not have that teamwork thing. And again, it just shows me that there's other issues that need to be dealt with. And I understand it can be a temporary solution, or it can be a way to make it easier. And again, I understand all that, but it's just not the ideal. What we've come up with in our church is we got studio gobos, which if you've seen those before, they're wood with absorption material in front and back, and there's gaps in the middle, and we put that around the drums. It looks a little funny. You have to get used to sort of the look, but it works spectacular. And you still get the natural sound, you still get the acoustic sound of the drums, but you get a ton of absorption, and you lose this directness of the people in the front row getting killed by the snare drum, especially, because the snare drum's here, the gobos come about to here, so it's really sucking up snare drum energy, which can be a challenge. And so that helps a lot, and it really gives us a lot more control. Sometimes you'll see in large churches where they'll have a enclosed drum booth. Gateway Church, we've been there a few times, and they have a completely enclosed drum thing, and they're in a room of 4,000 people, so it's not for volume. They're not doing that for volume. They're doing that for control. They want it to sound like the record, and they want it to sound like their recordings, and so obviously you can do that. When it's completely enclosed, you have a lot of control of the mix, of the sound, getting everything exactly the way you want it. Again, that's a philosophical sort of direction that they've chosen to do it that way. All of these kinds of things you've got to have conversations with your leadership about. Not in a combative way, but in a conversational way, And as the drummer, if you're the person that's causing the problems or you're part of the problem, then obviously you need to assume some responsibility for that as well, to be able to know, okay, what can I do to make this such a less of an issue? Because I know we've all been in church situations where every week there's complaints. Volume, it's too loud, it's too loud, it's too loud, it's too loud, and usually it's drums that is the problem. And so what can we do to choose drums that are going to help us, to choose cymbals that are going to help us, to practice playing soft and with intensity, to practice playing light on the bass drum. I mean, all these things that will help in taking us to that ability to mesh and to work within the room. A lot of times I'll play with mallets, especially like I'll do sort of like loopy sort of things. So it's just a totally different sort of vibe and a different feel. Again, it's a little rounder, a little less articulate. I really like using the hi-hat in kind of that splashy way, so it sort of helps create the sound, because obviously if I'm playing the toms, I can't be playing the cymbals at the same time. And so this allows me to keep that sort of splash happening. And I can play that really, really light and very sensitive. So very light, very textural, and again, just establishes that different kind of groove and different kind of sound by using these. And then, of course, you know, you can use these for little cymbal crashes and things like that, which works great. That's a little trick, by the way, if you haven't seen that one before. So if you want to do a one-handed roll while you're doing other stuff, just do it that way. So, all right, brushes. So these are wire brushes, very different than the plastic brushes. So this we can get more of a whoosh sound. The little click you're hearing is there's a dot on this, which is not very helpful for this job. So that you can get a nice just sort of sometimes I'll do that in certain songs where if I just want to keep the pulse with my hi-hat and bass drum and then just this dot's killing me. And so if you notice on that, you maybe didn't, but I was feathering the bass drum. So I was just lightly touching the bass drum and it was really allowing this to give me the time. Now we use a click, which we're going to get into here in a minute, and playing with a click, but we use a click on everything, and that's the magic of using a click on everything is I don't have to sit there and play all the articulations, is that I can allow the click to carry us with the articulations, and I can just play more of this kind of stuff, you know, and more and that kind of thing. And so the click is very helpful for that.